Mira lived at the very edge of town, where the last porch light faded into the hush of trees and the path turned from cobblestone to earth. Her cottage had a roof that sighed with every breeze and windows that wore halos of fog by evening. It was the sort of place that looked awake and kind, even when the rest of the world was yawning. On the stoop tonight sat a neat pair of boots, sprinkled with maple leaves the color of tea. The kettle inside purred on the stove like a small cat who knew bedtime was on its way. She lifted the kettle and listened to it settle, soft and satisfied. Outside, the wind shook a branch and a scatter of leaves spun down, slow as feathers, slower than thoughts. Mira liked to greet the season every night, to step outside with her mug and listen to the woods exhale. Autumn, she believed, was a dear friend who traveled a long way to visit and preferred company to silence. "Hello, old friend," she whispered, opening the door. Air like apple skin and smoke met her face. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, the yarn warm from the radiator, the fringe brushing her wrists. Beneath the maple by the gate, a tin lantern swayed on its hook, sending a tiny pool of amber across the path. In that circle of light, the dust in the air looked like drifting stars. The sight slowed her heartbeat, as it did every night. Down the hill and across the lane, Rowan's workshop wore its own glow. He was a lantern maker of the patient kind, the sort who whistled only after the clock struck 9, the sort who sanded edges until they felt like river stones. His windows were jammed with jars, some full of dried orange peels, some of tiny gears, some of blue glass beads that pretended to be drops of lake. When he raised a shade, the light spilled out like honey, strolling across the road, touching every fence post and gate latch with gentle fingers. Mira watched it reach her gate. She murmured thanks without words. She had been planting night-blooming alyssum that week, milky blossoms that opened in the dusk and smelled like new bread. Lantern light made them look like a handful of small moons. The longer she looked, the quieter she felt, like a pond easing into stillness after a tossed pebble. A fox slipped across the lane, precise and unhurried, its tail a plume drawn by an artist who had all the time in the world. It paused by Rowan's door, studying its reflection in the glass, then glanced at Mira as if to check that she, too, had noticed how calm the evening was. When the door opened, the fox vanished into a fold of shadow, and Rowan appeared with his apron still tied, a smudge of soot on his cheek and the soft, lopsided smile of someone who knew a secret and had decided the secret was gentleness. "Good night, Mira," he called, voice carrying the warmth of his shop. "Good night, Rowan," she answered, lifting her mug. "The air is perfect." "It is," he said. "I've finished the small river lantern you asked for. If you've time later, I'll bring it by." Mira nodded, content to let later be later. Tonight had the feeling of a page slowly turned, a story that never rushed because the ending was promised in kind. She sat on the step and felt the wood breathe under her, old planks remembering summers and rains. Her mug steamed into the maple branches. The leaves above her rattled like silk being folded. In the distance a bell chimed once. The town's little clock tower always seemed to speak gently after dark. Children were tucked into beds, cats unspooled themselves from sunny windowsills and found warmer laps, and candles blinked awake in living room windows. Mira imagined each person settling, socks on, book closed, promises kept for tomorrow. The bell's single note held them all, the way a hand can hold many strings and stop them from tangling. When she finished her drink, she drifted down the step and opened the gate. The lantern by the post breathed a little brighter, inviting her to walk the path she tended. By day she was the night gardener, trimming wayward vines and collecting seed, mending the edges of small places so birds and people would find them friendly. By night she was a listener. The path told many quiet stories, about footprints and feather tips, about rain that had decided to fall softly, about a leaf that landed exactly where it wanted to rest. She followed the curve where the maples grew denser and the ground turned springy with fallen needles. There, the world thinned to the essentials: breath, heartbeat, distant water, the mild scrape of wind in the high branches. Rowan's light faded behind her, becoming a comfortable memory, like the glow of a candle after you blow it out and see its ghost on your eyelids. Ahead, the river whispered. It always did, speaking in a language that said, I am going, and still I am here. Mira's steps slowed until each footfall matched her breath. In for 4, out for 4, the kind of counting that smooths edges and lays blankets over thoughts. She passed the little bench she had built last autumn from a fallen birch and a stack of flat stones. The birch seat was pale as a moonbeam, and in its grain she could trace a map of all the evenings she had rested there. She ran her fingers along the edge and sat. The river answered her with a tone deeper than a purr, tender as a cello far away. In the dark, shapes became ideas, and ideas became assurances. The black shape across the water was the willow. The taller black shape was the old mill where swallows nested in the rafters. A moth wove a crooked silver thread through the air, then vanished into night like a thought remembered and released. Somewhere near the bank, a frog sounded out a single note like a small drum. Everything, it seemed, had agreed to speak softly. She took a folded paper from her pocket, a list written in tidy lines. Mend gate latch. Gather acorns for the children's pockets. Tie threads to the fence for the goldfinches. Carry lantern to the river bend. She smiled at that last line and set the paper aside. It would be lovely to place a new light at the bend, where the water turned and the moon made a silver comma. People walking home late would feel the comma like a pause in their day, a place to rest mid-sentence without guilt. Footsteps approached along the path, slow and sure, the cadence of someone who knows not to startle a night animal, who knows even the night itself can startle. Rowan appeared, carrying a box tied with twine. The fox trotted at his heel as if it had been invited. He sat at the opposite end of the bench, leaving space between them that felt respectful and kind, like leaving a place at the table for a thought to sit down. I kept the glass thin on this one, he said quietly, so the flame will shiver a little with the breeze. Not enough to fuss, just enough to breathe. Mira nodded. The fox curled by her boots and closed its eyes as if listening to dreams. Rowan untied the twine and lifted the lantern free. It was delicate, square with rounded corners, its panes etched with willow leaves and a sliver of moon that repeated along the frame. When he set it on the birch bench, it caught the river's breath and filled with a soft, living light. They carried it together to the bend. The fox trotted ahead and sat like a tiny statue, its chest rising and falling, its ears flicking once. The two friends knelt and set the lantern on a flat stone. The flame conversed with the night, making a language of light and shadow across the water. The willow's long fingers trembled in the glow. The mill's silhouette softened. Mira's shoulders loosened as if someone had gently untied them. Thank you, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant Rowan, the river, the season, or the day for being gentle. Perhaps she meant them all. Gratitude, she thought, was a many-doored cottage. You could enter from any side and find yourself home. Rowan pressed the twine into her hand. For your list, he said, smiling. I'll walk you back. They returned by the quiet path. Every few steps, the lantern's light behind them reached out and tapped their backs like a friendly hand. A late leaf detached from its branch and drifted down past Mira's cheek. She caught it on her palm, read as a secret, then set it sailing again. At the gate, the fox slipped away toward the hedgerow without a sound, leaving behind the weightless feeling that sometimes arrives when everything is exactly as it should be. Rowan paused. "Sleep well," he said. "Let the lantern keep watch." "I will," she said. "You, too." He touched the brim of an invisible hat and wandered into the golden tunnel of his own workshop light. Mira climbed her step, felt the door's friendly weight, and went inside. The kettle, still a little warm, sat content on its ring. She rinsed her mug, placed it upside down on the towel, and moved through the small rituals of closing a day. Curtains drawn, latch settled, shawl folded, lamp turned low. The cottage hummed the way a seashell hums, with a sound that feels like memory. Upstairs, the quilt on her bed was good and heavy, patched with squares of weather, cloud-colored cotton, sky-blue flannel, leaf-green wool. Mira slid beneath it and lay on her side, listening for the river's voice through the open window. The new lantern's breath mingled with the water's whisper, and together they made a lullaby that felt older than clocks. A drift of cool air moved across her cheek, and she turned toward it, as if turning toward a friend's shoulder. In the moment before sleep, the town rearranged itself into the simple, loving map it saved for night. One lantern at the bend, one fox in the hedge, one workshop light fading, one kettle remembering warmth, one bed, one breath, one heart. Mira's last waking thought was a leaf's red hush against her palm, and the word that came with it was easy. Home. And the night, kind and careful, kept watch. Morning arrived like a soft shawl laid over the town. No hurry in its hands, no edge in its voice. It slipped through Mira's open window and rested on her eyelids until she woke in the gentlest way a person can wake. Not pushed by an alarm, not pulled by a task, but lifted as a leaf is lifted by a friendly draft. Downstairs, the kettle remembered what to do and began a quiet conversation with the stove. The house smelled faintly of toasted bread and clean wood. Mira dressed in layers the color of late apples and early clouds. When she brushed her hair, the bristles made a sound like distant rain. She folded her night thoughts into her pocket notebook. 3 small lines, nothing urgent. Only the sort of thoughts that hold doors for the day. Carry twine. Listen deeply. Leave room for pauses. She smiled at the last one, because pauses needed space, the way sparrows needed a bush to vanish into when the air startled. Outside, the world shone as if it had been polished with breath. Each maple leaf wore a different idea of red. Each fence rail wore a thin silver of dew. Where the path turned, the river lantern still breathed. She could feel its light without looking. It was a presence more than a brightness, like the feeling of someone watching the stove for you so the milk does not boil over. On her gate, someone had tucked a note beneath the latch string. Mira recognized Rowan's precise, pebble-smooth handwriting. Meeting this evening for the Leaf Library. Will you come? Bring anything you want to let go of, or anything you want to remember better. Below the words, he had drawn a foxtail shaped like a comma. The sight made her laugh, quiet and round. The Leaf Library had begun as a joke 3 autumns ago when the town found itself with more leaves than rakes, more colors than eyes. We should shelve them, Rowan had said, as if they were books. And so a long, low table appeared by the river bend, made of planks Mira had rescued from the old mill and sanded until they were smooth as a lullaby. People brought leaves and labeled them, First picnic after rain. Walk with grandmother. A day I remembered to breathe. The labels never said oak or maple, though the leaves often were. They said feeling in place and the small, bright hinge that memory swings on. In winter, the leaves slept between wax paper. In spring, the labels were carried over to seedlings in the town nursery. In summer, the table hosted glasses of lemonade and the laziness of cicadas. In autumn, the library returned to its original work, teaching the town how to read what it already loved. Mira tucked the note into her shawl and set about her day. She mended a fence latch by humming to it, which was not a magic but a patience. She tied 6 short threads to the top rail where goldfinches liked to rest, so the wind could play a ribboned song for them while they picked at thistle. She set a shallow bowl near the gate, water for whomever might need it, be they cat, sparrow, beetle, or a child with a story to tell and a dry throat to tell it with. In everything she did, she left room for pauses. By mid-morning, the town had warmed into movement. Baskets creaked on elbows, doors sighed, brooms whispered across stoops. The clock tower said 10 in a voice like a friendly teacher easing a class into their seats. Mira carried a small basket toward Rowan's workshop, following a path of leaf shadows that drifted and wove like fish under clear water. When she arrived, she found him at his workbench, coaxing a hinge to behave. His apron was dusted with mica and cinnamon, a sparkle and a warmth. "I got your note," she said, setting the basket down. "I brought some leaves that want names." "Good," Rowan said, without looking up yet. He was listening to the hinge, which required a kind of attention that didn't like to be broken. After a moment, the hinge agreed to turn without complaint. He tested it twice, then lifted his head and smiled in that lopsided way of his. "And I've a lantern to donate to the library, the listening kind." Mira tilted her head. "How does a lantern listen?" "The way we do when we are quiet," he said. "It doesn't trap the light. It accompanies it. I etched the panes with lines so the glow has something to follow. It seems to prefer that." He carried the lantern out from the back, where the sunlight fell in stripes across the floor. It was taller than the river lantern and hexagonal, with 6 slim posts and 6 thin panes, each etched with a different pattern of lines that glanced and met, parted and returned. It looked like a mapping of breath. When he set it by the door, the day's ordinary light slipped through, and for a moment it felt like standing in a melody. Mira reached out, not to touch, only to say hello. "It will help the leaves," she said. "People will set their palms against the glass and remember what they were trying to keep." Rowan nodded, pleased but unhurried. "Shall we carry it down before evening?" "We shall," Mira said. "After I hang wind chimes at the willow where the path bends. The air wants a voice today." They walked together to the river with a basket between them, because baskets, Rowan said, behaved better when 2 people shared them. The fox stepped out of a hedgerow near the workshop and fell into place beside them like a punctuation mark that had decided to walk the sentence. Its paws made soft commas in the dust. At the willow, Mira took from the basket a handful of chimes she had made last winter, thin slices of bottle glass in lake blue and tea amber, tied with linen thread to a hoop of bent willow. She lifted the hoop and hung it on a low branch. The chimes found the wind as if they had always known the address. The sound was delicate, the precise tone of 2 mugs tapping when friends laugh. The fox lifted its face, eyes half closed, as if memorizing the tune. "Listen," Mira said, though Rowan already was. They stood a while and let the chimes make a slow-lit sky in their ears. The river, not to be outdone, hummed low. The lantern at the bend exhaled, twice. In that small community of sounds, something inside both of them settled into the right kind of quiet, the kind that's full, not empty. They placed the new listening lantern on the library table and left it dark until evening. "Let the day breathe its own light," Rowan said. Mira agreed. She arranged the leaves she had brought in the basket along one edge of the table. Some were speckled, some deeply veined, one shaped like a hand with long, slender fingers. She read them the way a person reads a face, not guessing their secrets, only honoring their expressions. Children arrived after school with pockets full of treasure, twigs that curved like question marks, stones the size of story beginnings, a feather that argued for the existence of angels. They formed a short, patient line at the library table, serious as shopkeepers. Mira gave each child a small paper label. "Write how the leaf feels when you hold it," she said. "Or where your feet were when you found it." She did not say be poetic because poetry happened when she didn't. The children bent and wrote their truths in slow letters. "My father's laugh at the bakery door. Smelled like soup night. A path I ran twice and then didn't run anymore. The day leaned into afternoon." Rowan fetched the lantern's flame in a lidded tin and brought it like a secret to the six-sided house of glass. When he opened the tin, the small fire stepped out politely and took its place inside. The etched lines accepted the glow the way a palm accepts warm water. The lantern breathed, as he had promised, and the air around the table did what people do when they feel understood, it sighed. Neighbors came with their own small bundles. An old woman with a braid coiled like a sleeping cat brought a leaf the color of rust and said she'd been saving its name for years. A young man, shy, placed a leaf that had torn exactly in half in a summer storm and said, "I think it is two different stories now, but both are mine." A baker set down a leaf shaped like a heart somebody had forgotten how to draw and wrote only, "For the morning when I kept the buns in 5 minutes too long and no one was unkind about it." Mira watched the labels multiply, the table becoming a book that anyone could read. Children moved to one end and began to trade little truths. "I'll swap you smelled like soup night for the cat who forgave me." The chimes answered their bartering with sunny answers. The fox hopped onto the far edge of the grass and pretended to examine the library's rules. There were none, written in a frame that said "This space believes you," then lay down with its nose on its paws. When the clock tower said 6, the world turned its lamps up a fraction. Windows glowed. The riverbank gathered a fringe of quiet voices. Mira felt the settling that comes when work is finished for the day and the evening opens like a blue book. She poured hot cider into mugs from a thermos she had carried under her shawl, and the steam spelled cursive words in the air until the cool gathered them in. The first stars pricked through the pale roof of dusk. Rowan, beside her, moved in the careful rhythm of a person who knows the difference between making and forcing. He polished the lantern's brass cap with a cloth that smelled like lemons and patience, then set it askew, then straight, then a little askew again until the glow felt balanced, not posed. "There," he said to the lantern, as if giving it permission to be exactly itself. The lantern replied by throwing the gentle geometry of light onto the leaves. Triangles of amber, commas of gold. The children oohed as if a magic trick had been performed, though all that had happened was a good listening between flame and glass. A soft, almost nothing wind moved along the river. The chimes found it and spoke. The willow swayed in slow thought. People drew closer to the table in little pockets of friendship, 3 here, 2 there. A family of 5 and a dog who had decided not to bark. Mira read labels out loud, only as many as the evening could hold without spilling. Each reading made a small warmth between the reader and the listeners. Warmth you could not point to but could feel working in the bones of the night. When she reached the shy young man's torn leaf, she looked up to find him already watching her, as if asking permission to be understood. She read his label and then turned the leaf so the halves met at their edge. Sometimes, she said, two different stories are one when the light falls just so. He nodded in that breath-held way of a person who has put down something heavy without making a sound. Rowan tapped the lantern's post with a fingertip, once like a bell. "Shall we add tonight's new leaves to the winter book?" he asked. "Tomorrow," Mira said. "Let them sleep open first." He smiled. He knew about sleeping open, how a thing sometimes grows truer in the dark when no one is trying to grow it. The evening thinned into tenderness. People drifted home with their hands tucked into their own sleeves, the way you do when you carry something invisible but important, like a new calm. The fox stretched, shook its fur into order, and crossed the path with a glance that said, "I will check the hedges, you check the windows." The chimes settled into less and less until they were only a thought of sound. The river kept going, and still it was here. Mira and Rowan tidied the table in the quiet way of good companions who do not need to narrate every kindness. They tucked the labels that might blow away under a small river stone. They slid a cloth beneath the lantern to warm the wood. They left 2 mugs by the willow for whoever might arrive late and feel forgiven by finding a cup still waiting. When the last visitor had waved and turned into a lit doorway, they walked together toward the bend. "Your chimes are a gentle sort of brave," Rowan said after a while. "How so?" "They keep singing even when no one knows the tune," he said. "They trust the air to carry them somewhere kind." Mira thought of the shy young man, of the bun baker's forgiveness, of the old woman with the saved-up name. "I suppose the town taught them," she said. "If you are brave gently enough, someone will learn how to answer you." At the bend, the small river lantern breathed as steadily as a sleeping child. The willow's curtain of leaves hid the stars and made their own. Mira touched the lantern's post with the back of her fingers, as if taking its temperature. "We will bring you a friend tomorrow," she told it. "You may listen together." Rowan laughed under his breath. "Lanterns make good friends. They do not talk over you. And they make room for pauses," Mira said, pleased to use her pocket line out loud. "Even long ones." They stood in one, then. Together, they let a long pause happen. No one hurried to fill it. In the pause, things clarified. How the river changed pitch as it rounded the bend. How the willow's slightest sway made a coolness on the cheek. How the town behind them clicked and settled as houses turned themselves down to simmer. In the pause, their breathing matched without trying, and the air seemed to widen around them to hold that simple harmony. At last they walked home the way pigeons walk, content, unafraid, a little round with evening. At Mira's gate, Rowan stopped and put his hand on the latch, the way a person touches a page before turning it. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll begin the winter book. There is a part for your handwriting that the leaves have been waiting for. And for your lantern that listens," Mira said. "Bring it early, I'll warm tea." He tipped an invisible hat again. He had gotten in the habit and found it pleasant, and went down the lane into his mellow light. Mira paused on the step, listening to the wind consult the chimes one last time. Then she went inside, the door making its satisfied sound. Her evening rituals moved through her like a song one knows by heart. Rinse cup, fold shawl, light bedside lamp, smooth quilt. She set the pocket notebook on the window ledge and added a 4th line under the morning's 3. The town reads itself best in autumn. The river agreed, humming. The lantern at the bend kept its watch. The listening lantern waited on the table with patience that did not feel like waiting at all. In bed, the heavy quilt held her like good advice. The maple leaves outside brushed the glass with their fingertip shadows, casting little amber boats that rocked on the wall. Mira watched them float. She breathed in for 4, out for 4, the counting smooth as a loop of ribbon. Heavy in the best way, she drifted down through warm layers of quiet. Just before sleep, she saw again the shy young man's leaf, the two halves meeting, the truth of both unargued. The word that came was simple, a lantern's favorite. Together, and the night, which understood such words, drew its coverlet up to her chin and promised to keep the soft book of the town open to the page she needed, until morning turned it kindly on. The season was turning, though not all at once. Autumn was careful about its entrances, gentle in the way it shifted light, polite in the way it placed its cool hand on her shoulder. Some mornings Mira woke to windows embroidered with breath, and once or twice a thin skin of frost powdered the grass, as if the town had been dusted with sugar in the night. Those mornings made the river whisper differently, lower and slower, as though it too was exhaling mist. Mira drew her shawl tighter on one such morning, standing at the gate. The listening lantern still waited at the leaf library, glass cooled now by the night air. Rowan had written her a note that morning. "Shall we plan a lantern walk before winter closes the paths?" The thought thrilled the town, children especially, because lantern walks had become a yearly ritual, half parade, half lullaby, a night when every street carried light and no shadow felt alone. She could see it already in her mind. Tiny lanterns cupped in mittened hands, larger ones swinging gently from poles, the fox weaving between feet like a flame with fur, the clock tower chiming soft encouragement. A town reminding itself it was not just a collection of houses but a shared hearth. All day the town hummed with preparation. The baker braided loaves in the shapes of suns and moons. The seamstress stitched quick ribbons to tie around lantern handles. Children ran home with the excitement of secrets and returned with glass jars or paper globes, proud as inventors. Mira gathered twigs to mark the edges of the path, wrapping each with strips of linen so they would catch even the smallest light. Rowan repaired hinges, fitted new glass, and polished brass until his workshop smelled of lemon oil and glowing patience. By twilight, the town was ready. The first lantern lit was always the river lantern at the bend. Mira and Rowan carried fresh flame in a tin, accompanied, as always, by the fox, who trotted with the composure of someone who had attended every walk and intended to attend every one still to come. At the willow, a small crowd waited, children holding their breath as if they were about to hear a story. Rowan touched the wick, and the lantern answered with a bloom of steady amber. A ripple of soft voices moved through the crowd, the kind of sound people make when they see something both familiar and miraculous. From there, the walk began. Mira carried her own small lantern, etched with alyssum blossoms that seemed to sway when the flame moved. Rowan carried none. He said his role was to walk beside light, not ahead of it. The fox darted between shadows, tail brushing against boots. The seamstress's ribbons fluttered in the breeze, tied to jars glowing green, blue, gold. Children whispered names to their lanterns as if introducing them to friends. Adults walked slower, shoulders lowering as the night accepted their weight. The town, strung with lights like beads on a thread, moved as one body through the lanes. Every window they passed blinked awake. Cats leapt to sills to watch. Dogs wagged at the glow as if it might wag back. The baker's loaves waited on the library table under cloths, breathing out their fragrant warmth. Above it all, The clock tower counted the hours not sternly but kindly, each chime a soft reassurance. You're here, and here is safe. At the library table, the listening lantern had been waiting all day. When Rowan relit it, the etched lines filled with flame as if someone had written music across glass. Its light touched the leaves, their labels shimmering with borrowed brightness. A child read one aloud. For the day I saw snow for the first time and it did not feel cold, only alive. The words seemed to belong to the evening itself. The walk circled back along the river, where frost had begun to gather like secret lace on stones and reeds. Each breath from the crowd made visible clouds, each cloud drifting upward to join the low mist. Mira felt the calm settle into her like a second shawl, heavy and gentle. She looked to Rowan, who carried no lantern but whose presence glowed all the same. He caught her glance and returned it with that lopsided smile, one corner of his mouth tugged by some invisible kindness. When the walk ended, people lingered. Children compared their lanterns like favorite books. Friends exchanged the sort of small, reassuring words that meant I see you, I'm glad we share this place. The fox curled by the willow and pretended to nap, one eye open as though to confirm the night was proceeding correctly. Mira helped Rowan tidy the table, folding cloths and stacking mugs, her fingers moving in the rhythm of someone who had done this before and would happily do it again. Did you notice? Rowan asked as he gathered the last crumbs of bread. Notice what? The frost, he said. It means the season is ready to turn the page. Mira breathed in the air, cool, silver, promising. Then we'll read it slowly, she said. They walked home together, lanterns bobbing in the hands of neighbors ahead of them, the river whispering at their side, the stars above leaning closer to listen. At her gate, Rowan paused, fingers resting lightly on the latch as though it were an old friend. Sleep well, Mira, he said. Tonight the frost will write its first letter. Tomorrow we'll read it in the grass. And reply with leaves, she said, smiling. They parted there, each carrying a piece of the night with them. Mira climbed her steps, the shawl warm against her shoulders, her heart carrying the lantern walk like a lullaby still echoing. Upstairs, under the quilt, she watched her breath fog the air once before settling deep, the way frost settles, soft and sure. And the night, proud of itself, tucked her in and promised. Even in frost, there is warmth enough for dreams. The first true frost of the season came in silence, as most beginnings do. Mira woke to windows edged with lace, each pane traced with rivers and branches of ice. The garden wore white dust as if a kindly hand had sifted sugar over every stone, every fence rail, every curled stem of alyssum. The world had become a sketchbook drawn in silver and soft light. When she stepped outside, the breath in her chest turned visible, a quiet cloud that drifted upward as though her thoughts had taken shape. The lantern at the bend had survived the night, its glass misted, its flame banked to a steady glow. It had written its frost letter, as Rowan promised, patterns of fern and feather etched into the pane, messages in a script only winter knew. Mira touched the glass gently, and for a moment her finger left a clear mark, a window through the frost. Through it she saw the river, still moving, still whispering I go on, and still I am here. She carried her notebook down to the leaf library, where the table wore its own white veil. Rowan was already there, lantern at his side, rubbing his palms together for warmth. The fox trotted circles in the frost, leaving small parentheses in the grass. Good morning, he said, his voice a little cloud in the air. The first page of the winter book waits. The winter book was not a single volume, but many scrap pages bound by ribbon, cloth covers stitched from old shirts, thick cardboard pressed into service as memory's spine. Each year the town gathered its autumn leaves and folded their labels inside, storing them until the thaw. Then, when the first buds arrived, the winter book would be read aloud, page by page, so the town could remember what it had carried through the cold. It was a ritual not of keeping, but of tending, a way of saying, we remember you, and by remembering, we keep warm. Together, Mira and Rowan began. They lifted each leaf, pressed between wax sheets, and slipped it into the waiting book. Rowan wrote the date, his handwriting like river stones, round, balanced, patient. Mira copied the labels in her careful script, the lines leaning a little to the right, as if walking forward. She read them softly as she wrote. Smelled like soup night, the cat who forgave me. For the morning when I kept the buns in 5 minutes too long. My father's laugh at the bakery door. Each phrase was a lantern of its own, glowing again as it entered the book. Children came by in boots, cheeks flushed, and offered their leaves with mittened hands. Mira pressed them gently, promising their words would be safe. The fox sniffed each offering as if approving. By midday, the frost had lifted into mist, curling over the river and drifting among the trees. The lanterns breathed steady along the path, their flames confident now in the company of one another. The town moved slower, voices quieter, as though the air itself reminded everyone that the season asked for gentleness. That evening, the first gathering of the winter book took place. Families brought blankets. Friends carried mugs of tea and spiced milk. The baker arrived with loaves warm enough to steam the night air. The table was moved closer to the willow so the river's whisper could be heard. Mira sat at one end, Rowan at the other, the book open between them. The lantern of listening glowed at its side. They began to read. Mira's voice was soft but steady, Rowan's lower and even, each line given space enough to breathe. After every few entries, they paused, letting the words settle like snowflakes on the listeners. The pauses were long, longer than any ordinary conversation would bear, but no one hurried. In those spaces, the town breathed as one, warmed by what it remembered. A child, sleepy-eyed, leaned against his mother's shoulder and whispered, "It feels like the book is reading us." His mother kissed his hair and nodded, because it was true. The winter book, like the lanterns, did not only carry light, it reflected it back, reminding each person they were part of the warmth. As the night deepened, the fox curled at Mira's feet, ears twitching as if catching dreams. The willow swayed, scattering a few stubborn leaves that landed on the open pages, becoming part of the story without needing labels. Rowan closed the book gently after the last page was read, tying its ribbon with fingers that moved as if blessing the air. "Until spring," he said softly. The town lingered, reluctant to leave. Mira poured the last of the cider, handed out the final slices of bread. People drifted homeward slowly, lanterns swinging low, conversations trailing into quiet hums. The frost returned as they walked, reclaiming the grass, writing new letters across the windows. At last, only Mira, Rowan, and the fox remained at the table. The river hummed its endless refrain. The willow leaned close as if to listen. Mira closed her notebook and slipped it into her shawl. Rowan placed his hand on the lantern's cap, as if sealing a promise. "Do you hear it?" Mira asked. "The pause?" Rowan said. "Yes," she said. "The longest pause of the year. The one that carries us from autumn into winter." They stood together in that pause, not rushing to name it, not needing to. It was the silence between heartbeats, the breath before sleep, the calm that says all is well, even here, even now. In that pause, the world felt whole. When they parted at Mira's gate, their good nights were simple, without ceremony. The fox followed Mira inside, curling by the hearth as if it had always belonged. Mira climbed the stairs, folded her shawl, set the notebook by her lamp. She slid beneath the quilt heavy with patches of sky and leaf. Outside, frost was busy drawing its secret language again, covering the town in promises of rest. She breathed in for 4, out for 4, the counting smooth and round. Her eyelids lowered, carrying lantern light behind them. Her last waking thought was of the winter book, safe under ribbon, waiting for spring. The word that came with it was deep as the river's song. Peace. And the night, gentle and eternal, laid its hand over the town and whispered, "Sleep now. The story will keep until morning."